Among the Dragon Ball community, much confusion has always surrounded the overall purpose of Goku's cries in the film Broly the Legendary Super Saiyan, specifically its effects on the titular villain himself. And lately, many misinterpretations have been appearing in the comment sections of one of my prior videos, so I felt the need to clear everything up. So here's explaining Goku's cries in Broly the Legendary Super Saiyan. To begin, in the previously released TV special, Bardock the Father of Goku, a scientist present in Goku's nursery stated that an infant Goku had the cry of a great warrior. Now, technically that line only exists within the English language dub, but despite that, its idea sets the stage and perfectly reflects the later use in the movie Broly the Legendary Super Saiyan, where the cries themselves are now utilized to convey Goku's tenacity, his never-given attitude, and his latent potential as a fighter. Evidence includes a line of dialogue during the scene itself, spoken by a soldier who witnessed the unfolding situation, who stated something along the lines of, "That kid," referring to Goku, "may be weak, but he's got a lot of guts." To further articulate on this scene, I have to define both Goku and Broly's place in the world as infants. Now, as Goku had a power level of 2, his own kind perceived him to be a low-class warrior, whereas with Broly, the baby possessing a power level of 10,000, those same people instinctively saw him as the ideal Saiyan, or better yet said, the pinnacle of their species. So much so, that before his might, lesser Saiyans would crumble. Even think about it like this. The mighty Prince Vegeta, as an adult I might add, instantly lost the will to fight, or his fighting spirit, upon witnessing Broly's transformation into the legendary Super Saiyan form. So, the mere presence of this Saiyan of legend could render a normal one speechless. Returning to the crying scene itself. Now, what bothered the young Broly wasn't Goku's cries, but what they represented, his unbreakable fighting spirit, which remained unintimidated before a power level of 10,000. Remember how a line of dialogue from this scene stated that Goku had guts for crying next to someone so powerful? Well, that alone reinforces the idea that the sheer magnitude of Broly's strength couldn't break Goku's spirit like it would later go on to do with Vegeta's. And to Broly, someone acting completely uninhibited by his might challenges his dominance. So Goku's continued crying, or refusal to silence himself, meant that Broly held no influence over Goku. And ultimately, that's what bothered Broly, not the sound of crying. To further supplement my claim of Goku's unyielding willpower bothering Broly instead of the sounds of crying, let's examine a time during the events of this movie where Broly, as a fully cognizant adult, displayed signs of unease, which occurred in a scene where he pummeled Goku into and through the side of a mountain, only for a seemingly helpless foe to catch the final blow, thus provoking the titular villain to back off and make an unnerved face. In tying this scene back to the crying flashback, you could call the blocking of Broly's punch an adult version of Goku's refusal to stop crying, as both scenes feature a significantly weaker Goku not backing down to a greater power, and both occasions even evoke a similar response from Broly. What I've been leading into is that Goku and Broly as infants lack the means to express themselves, like they couldn't talk or fully control their limbs, meaning they couldn't yet fight it out. And the story even implies that not even Broly could harness his ki until after the attempts on his life. So the cries themselves served as their only medium of communication. In a certain sense, I don't think it would be all that much of a stretch to interpret this encounter as Goku and Broly's first battle against each other, as it represented a struggle for dominance, like most other brawls of the franchise, just without the normal punches, kicks, and ki blasts to say, "I'm stronger than you." Before I continue on, I'll address a topic that I know many detractors of this video will use as an argument against me, which is that it relies too heavily on one line of dialogue stating that Goku has guts for crying next to Broly. But in responding to that, I referenced another scene of crying from the movie, specifically starring the titular villain himself, which occurred during the destruction of Planet Vegeta sequence. Now, during this scene, Broly finally unleashes his latent power to save himself and his father. But if you look closely, you'll notice he begins to cry once he starts releasing his protective energy. So, since what I've said symbolizes tenacity and fighting spirit kicked in for Broly upon facing certain doom, I think it's fair to say that it validates my claim for Goku as well. Switching gears, the other topic concerning the nature of Goku's crying involves their lasting effects on Broly, where many fans have been led to believe that this brief interaction resulted in the legendary Super Saiyan turning evil, or that it caused him to sustain some form of PTSD. To debunk both of these claims, think about Broly's identity within the film, as the legendary Super Saiyan, which essentially personifies his race's very nature, only to a degree magnitudes higher. Like Saiyans innately possess high power levels, and Broly himself was born with one reaching 10,000, a number rivaling the strongest of adults, And because of that, I believe it's safe to assume that since Saiyans themselves naturally enjoy violence and destruction, that Broly would have been the destroyer of galaxies regardless of Goku's influence. Plus, in the most literal sense, the story portrayed him as bloodthirsty, as after sustaining a blow to the face from Goku, he licked up and enjoyed the taste of his own blood, which if you ask me is pretty indicative of his nature. Next, to prove how Broly doesn't suffer from PTSD. To begin, many might rationalize how our union with an adult Goku, sending him into a frenzied panic capable of disrupting the influence of his mind control device, and how it triggered a flashback sequence, as indications of trauma. But here's why neither are true. First off, Broly's anxious state didn't derive from reuniting with a person whom he associates with a bad memory, but instead because that person's great power reinvigorated his fighting spirit, causing his true nature to clash with his mind control device, hence why he's acting like he's being torn apart by two forces. Next, the story portrayed Broly as a very instinctually driven character. As an untrained infant, he saved his father and himself from an exploding planet, and he could detect Goku's latent potential from Cries alone. So him having the ability to recognize massive power hidden away in a person disguising their true strength isn't out of the question, and in all honesty, a more probable scenario than him burning the face of an infant he met 30 plus years ago into his memory. Another key detail from this scene that suggests that Goku's power or fighting spirit disturbs Broly rather than a bad past encounter involves how even before viewing Goku's face, Broly's power rose, which also provoked Goku to adopt a more serious attitude before turning around. So, unless Broly could somehow recognize Goku from his hairstyle, I just think it's a safer assumption that Goku's aura is the culprit. What further supports my claim dwells in the actual dialogue, as Paragus stated that Goku's power influenced Broly's behavior. And diving deeper into that sequence of events, the subsequent flashback occurring after that line originated from the mind of Paragus instead of his adult son, which adds credence to Broly not even remembering his past history with Goku, let alone suffering PTSD from it. So again, Broly's anxiety during this scene stems from his mind control device struggling to suppress his animalistic urges, rather than a past memory of Goku haunting him. I might as well include this too. If some deep-rooted grudge drove his character, how come he never mentioned it once he regained full dominance over his body and mind? Like in the dialogue, he constantly belittles anyone that opposes him, but never once does he utter any variation of the word cry. So his spoken lines reinforce that his goal is to stand atop the Saiyan food chain, and to break the will of anyone that attempts to take that title away from him. A frequent example people use to say that Goku's crying traumatized Broly occurred during the climax of the film, when an adult Goku's fist pierced Broly's chest. And in between scenes, the flashback of Goku's crying played, which many people interpret as a memory that's always present in Broly's mind. But to me, I believe that moment serves as the catalyst for what jogged Broly's memory of his past with Goku. And why I see it that way stems from the fact that a prior Dragon Ball Z movie already explored the same concept of a near-death experience / fatal blow from Goku, provoking a memory of an old encounter with him to resurface, which if you haven't realized by now, occurred in Cooler's Revenge. For reference, in the film itself, Goku with a Kamehameha launched Cooler directly into the sun, and as its flames consumed him, he recollected how he allowed an infant Goku to escape a dying planet Vegeta, and that ultimately led to his downfall, or where he is now. Getting back on topic, because a similar scenario played out in Cooler's Revenge, I believe it's highly likely that the nearly identical scene and concept from Broly's Legendary Super Saiyan shares the same intention behind it. On another note, this scene carries a more symbolic message too, through the theme of fate, or the repeating cycle, aka what happens as a kid will also happen as an adult. Like earlier, I rationalized how Goku's crying at Broly could be construed as their first fight. Well, building off of that, because the young future Legendary Super Saiyan couldn't silence his rival, that symbolically represents his first loss. So it's quite fitting that during Broly's presumed first real loss as an adult on the battlefield, that the scene interjects his first spiritual loss as an infant. Meaning that once again, the supposedly low-class warrior Goku triumphed over the Legendary Super Saiyan. Just to prove I'm not overthinking it by inserting the idea of the repeating cycle, think about the method of how King Vegeta sentenced Broly to be executed. A knife through the chest. Well, how did Goku defeat Broly? A punch through the chest. And that action basically mimics what happened to him as a baby. So, because an actual action repeated itself later on in the story, I don't believe the symbolic interpretation repeating itself is just a coincidence either. One final subject to discuss, pertaining to how, in Broly's Second Coming, many people use the scene of Goten's cries waking Broly from his slumber to argue that crying haunts the Legendary Super Saiyan. First off, what haunts Broly is Goku, but more so his loss to him. The montage where he rises from his sleep even depicts Goku's penetrating punch from the previous movie, implying that his prior defeat sprung him into his newfound rage-driven obsession for Goku, or Kakarot as he so often refers to him as. Getting back on track, appearance-wise, Goten obviously looks nearly identical to Goku, but what got lost in translation regards the fact that in the Japanese dub of the film, he shares the exact same voice actress as his father, meaning Goten's cry sounded exactly the same as the young Goku's, so crying isn't exactly what awakened Broly, but instead that those cries share the same voice as the man of whom he currently obsesses over. So yes, in Second Coming, cries played a role in reviving Broly, but they were not the driving force of what actually awakened him. Again, it's not the cries themselves, but what they represented. Returning to the main focus of this video, in conclusion, the infant Goku's cries embody his willpower, latent strength, and fighting spirit, and those qualities, which can exist without the medium of crying, are what bothered Broly. And that's why an adult Goku, who had long since grown out of his loud, obnoxious baby phase, could still unnerve a titan like Broly. With all this said, thanks for watching, and hopefully this clears up many of the misconceptions surrounding the original Broly. If you're still interested in this subject, you may consider giving my prior video, The Original Broly is Better review. Again, thanks for watching.